Hello, it's good to see you. Today we are back with some little spooky stories. They're not really scary. They're actually kind of cute. Maybe a little bit corny, but just we have some little stories that we're going to read together. And this time I have a candle from Aldi. This is a Timberwick scented candle. And the Timberwick candle makes a crackly sound when it burns. It kind of reminds me of the sound of a record needle on a record before it reaches the song, which is making that little delicate scratchy sound. It's kind of like that. So it's a sweet pumpkin roll candle. I can smell it. It smells really good. I wish you could smell it. It smells great. So we're going to have a little crackling candle in the background of this video, and that's a little different from the last one, so I'm just going to light it and my little lighter. And it starts to make a little sound as it warms up. It kind of sounds like a record needle to me. It sounds like a record player. Or a dirt bike off in the distance. Anyway, we're going to have this in the background. I'm just going to set it down. And we're going to read some stories. I have my flashlight so I can see the book. And again, these are not super scary stories at all. Okay, the title of the first story is The Babysitter. It was 9 o'clock in the evening. Everybody was sitting on the couch in front of the TV. There was Richard, Brian, Jenny, and Doreen, the babysitter. The telephone rang. "Maybe it's your mother," said Doreen. She picked up the phone. Before she could say a word, a man laughed hysterically and hung up. "Who was it?" asked Richard. "Some nut," said Doreen. "What did I miss?" At 9:30 the telephone rang again. Doreen answered it. It was the man who had called before. "I'll be there soon," he said, and he laughed and hung up. "Who was it?" the children asked. "Some crazy person," she said. About 10 o'clock, the telephone rang again. Jenny got to it first. "Hello," she said. It was the same man. "One more hour," he said, and he laughed and hung up. "He said 1 more hour. What did he mean?" asked Jenny. "Don't worry," said Doreen. "It's somebody fooling around." "I'm scared," said Jenny. About 10:30 the telephone rang once more. When Doreen picked it up, the man said, "Pretty soon now," and he laughed. "Why are you doing this?" Doreen screamed, and he hung up. "Was it that guy again?" asked Brian. "Yes," said Doreen. "I'm going to call the operator and complain." The operator told her to call back if it happened again, and she would try to trace the call. At 11 o'clock, the telephone rang again. Doreen answered it. "Very soon now," the man said, and he laughed and hung up. Doreen called the operator. Almost at once, she called back. "That person is calling from a telephone upstairs," she said. "You'd better leave. I'll get the police." Just then, a door upstairs opened. A man they had never seen before started down the stairs toward them. As they ran from the house, he was smiling in a very strange way. A few minutes later, the police found him there and arrested him. The end. Okay, this next story is entitled The Viper. A widow lived alone on the top floor of an apartment house. One morning her telephone rang. "Hello," she said. "This is the Viper," a man said. "I'm coming up." Somebody is fooling around, she thought, and hung up. A half hour later, the telephone rang again. It was the same man. "It's the Viper," he said. "I'll be up soon." The widow didn't know what to think, but she was getting frightened. Once more the telephone rang. Again it was the Viper. "I'm coming up now," he said. She quickly called the police. They said they would be right over. When the doorbell rang, she sighed with relief. There they are, she thought. But when she opened the door, there stood a little old man with a bucket and a cloth. "I am the Viper," he said. "I wish to wash and wipe the windows." The end. This next one is entitled The Attic. A man named Rupert lived with his dog in a house deep in the woods. Rupert was a hunter and a trapper. The dog was a big German shepherd named Sam. Rupert had raised Sam from a pup. Almost every morning Rupert went hunting, and Sam stayed behind and guarded the house. One morning, as Rupert was checking his traps, he got the feeling that something was wrong at home. He hurried back as fast as he could, but when he got there, he found that Sam was missing. He searched the house and the woods nearby, but Sam was nowhere to be seen. He called and he called, but the dog did not answer. For days, Rupert looked for Sam, but he could find no trace of him. Finally, he gave up and went back to his work. But one morning, he heard something moving in the attic. He picked up his gun. Then he thought, "I'd better be quiet about this." So he took off his boots, and in his bare feet, he began to climb the attic stairs. He slowly took one step, then another, until at last he reached the attic door. He stood outside listening, but he didn't hear a thing. Then he opened the door and, ah! And then you might wonder what happened after that. Well, you'd scream too if you stepped on a nail in your bare feet. The end. Here's one entitled Erin Kelly's Bones. Erin Kelly was dead. They bought him a coffin and had a funeral and buried him. But that night, he got out of his coffin and he came home. His family was sitting around the fire when he walked in. He sat down next to his widow and he said, "What's going on? You all act like somebody died. Who's dead?" His widow said, "You are." "I don't feel dead," he said. "I feel fine." "You don't look fine," said the widow. "You look dead. You'd better get back to the grave where you belong." "I'm not going back to the grave until I feel dead," he said. Since Erin wouldn't go back, his widow couldn't collect his life insurance. Without that, she couldn't pay for the coffin, and the undertaker said he would take it back. Erin didn't care. He just sat by the fire, rocking in a chair and warming his hands and feet. But his joints were dry and his back was stiff, and every time he moved, he creaked and cracked. One night, the best fiddler in town came to court the widow. Since Erin was dead, the fiddler wanted to marry her, and the two of them sat on one side of the fire, and Erin sat on the other side, creaking and cracking. "How long do we have to put up with this dead corpse?" the widow asked. "Something must be done," the fiddler said. "This isn't very jolly," Erin said. "Let's dance." The fiddler got out his fiddle and he began to play. Erin stretched himself, shook himself, got up, took a step or two, and began to dance. With his old bones rattling and his yellow teeth snapping and his bald head wagging and his arms flip-flopping, around and around he went. With his long legs clicking and his knee bones knocking, he skipped and pranced around the room. How that dead man danced! But pretty soon a bone worked loose and fell to the floor. "Look at that," said the fiddler. "Play faster," said the widow. The fiddler played faster. Crickety-crack, down and back, the dead man went hopping, and his dry bones kept dropping. This way, that way, the pieces just kept popping. "Play, man, play," cried the widow. The fiddler fiddled, and dead Erin danced. Then Erin fell apart, collapsed into a pile of bones, all except his bald head bone. That grinned at the fiddler, cracked its teeth, and kept dancing. "Look at that," groaned the fiddler. "Play louder," cried the widow. "Ho, ho," said the head bone, "ain't we having fun?" The fiddler couldn't stand it. "Widow," he said, "I'm going home," and he never came back. The family gathered up Erin's bones and put them back in the coffin. They mixed them up so he couldn't fit them together. After that, Erin stayed in his grave, but his widow never did get married again. Erin had seen to that. The end. The title of this story is Wait Till Martin Comes. An old man was out for a walk. When a storm came up, he looked for a place to take shelter. Soon he came to an old house. He ran up on the porch and knocked on the door, but nobody answered. By now the rain was pouring down, thunder was booming, and lightning was flashing. So he tried the door. When he found it was unlocked, he went inside. Except for a pile of wooden boxes, the house was empty. He broke up some of the boxes and made a fire with them. Then he sat down in front of the fire and dried himself. It was so warm and cozy that he fell asleep. When he woke up, a black cat was sitting near the fire. It stared at him for a while. Then it purred. "That's a nice cat," he thought, and he dozed off again. When he opened his eyes, there was a second cat in the room, but this one was as big as a wolf. It looked at him very closely, and it asked, "Shall we do it now?" "No," said the other cat. "Let's wait till Martin comes." "I must be dreaming," thought the old man. He closed his eyes again. Then he took another look, but now there was a third cat in the room, and this one was as big as a tiger. It looked the old man over, and it asked, "Shall we do it now?" "No," said the others. "Let's wait till Martin comes." The old man jumped up, jumped out the window, and started running. "When Martin comes, you tell him I couldn't wait," he said. I guess that's the end. The end. I guess we'll never know who Martin was. Okay. Here's one entitled The Ghost with the Bloody Fingers. A businessman arrived at a hotel late one night and asked for a room. The room clerk told him the hotel was all filled up. There is only one empty room, he said, but we don't rent that one because it's haunted. "I'll take it," said the businessman. "I don't believe in ghosts." The man went up to the room. He unpacked his things and he went to bed. As soon as he did, a ghost came out of the closet. Its fingers were bleeding and it was moaning, "Bloody fingers, bloody fingers." When the man saw the ghost, he grabbed his things and ran. The next night a woman arrived very late. Again, all the rooms were taken except the haunted room. "I'll sleep there," she said. "I'm not afraid of ghosts." As soon as she got into bed, the ghost came out of the closet. Its fingers were still bleeding. It was still moaning, "Bloody fingers, bloody fingers." And the woman took one look and ran. A week later, another guest arrived very late. He also took the haunted room. After he unpacked, he got out his guitar and he began to play. Soon the ghost appeared. As before, its fingers were bleeding, and it was moaning, "Bloody fingers, bloody fingers." The man paid no attention. He just kept strumming his guitar. But the ghost kept moaning, and his fingers kept bleeding. Finally, the guitar player looked up. "Cool it, man," he said. "Get yourself a Band-Aid." The end. And it looks like that's the end of the book. I'm going to go back and look and see what we can read here. Here's a little story entitled "The Big Toe." A boy was digging at the edge of the garden when he saw a big toe. He tried to pick it up, but it was stuck to something. So he gave it a good hard jerk, and it came off in his hand. Then he heard something groan and scamper away. The boy took the toe into the kitchen and showed it to his mother. "It looks nice and plump," she said. "I'll put it in the soup and we'll have it for supper." That night, his father carved the toe into 3 pieces, and they each had a piece. Then they did the dishes, and when it got dark, they went to bed. The boy fell asleep almost at once. But in the middle of the night, a sound awakened him. It was something out in the street. It was a voice, and it was calling to him. "Where's my toe?" it groaned. When the boy heard that, he got very scared. But he thought, "It doesn't know where I am. It'll never find me." Then he heard the voice once more, only now it was closer. "Where's my toe?" it groaned. The boy pulled the blankets over his head and closed his eyes. "I'll go to sleep," he thought. "When I wake up, it'll be gone." But soon he heard the back door open, and again he heard the voice. "Where's my toe?" it groaned. Then the boy heard footsteps move through the kitchen into the dining room, into the living room, into the front hall, and then slowly they climbed the stairs. Closer and closer they came. Soon they were in the upstairs hall. Now they were outside his door. "Where is my toe?" the voice groaned. His door opened. Shaking with fear, he listened as the footsteps slowly moved through the dark toward his bed, and then they stopped. "Where's my toe?" the voice groaned. "You've got it." The end. Let's see. Now we've read most of the scary stories in here. I'm going to read this one. It's entitled Alligators. A young woman in town married a man from another part of the country. He was a nice fellow, and they got along pretty well together. There was only one problem. Every night he'd go swimming in the river. Sometimes he would be gone all night long, and she would complain about how lonely she was. The couple had 2 young sons. As soon as the boys could walk, their father began to teach them how to swim. And when they got to be old enough, he took them swimming in the river at night. Often they would stay there all night long, and the young woman would stay home all by herself. After a while, she began to act in a strange way. At least, that's what the neighbors said. She told him that her husband was turning into an alligator and that he was trying to turn the boys into alligators. Everybody told her there was nothing wrong with the man taking his sons swimming. That was a natural thing to do. And when it came to alligators, there just weren't any nearby. Everybody knew that. Early one morning, the young woman came running into town from the direction of the river. She was soaking wet. She said a big alligator and two little alligators had pulled her in and had tried to get her to eat a raw fish. They were her husband and her sons, she said, and they wanted her to live with them. But she had gotten away. Her doctor decided she had lost her mind, and he had her put in a hospital for a while. After that, nobody saw her husband and boys again. They just disappeared. But now and then a fisherman would tell about seeing alligators in the river at night. Usually it was one big alligator and two small ones. But people said they were just making it up. Everybody knows there aren't any alligators around here. And the story is entitled Room for One More. A man named Joseph Blackwell came to Philadelphia on a business trip. He stayed with friends in the big house they owned outside the city. That night they had a good time visiting, but when Blackwell went to bed, he tossed and turned and couldn't sleep. Sometime during the night he heard a car turn into the driveway. He went to the window to see who was arriving at such a late hour. In the moonlight, he saw a long black hearse filled with people. The driver of the hearse looked up at him. When Blackwell saw his strange, hideous face, he shuddered. The driver called to him, "There's room for one more." Then he waited for a minute or two, and he drove off. In the morning, Blackwell told his friends what had happened. "You were dreaming," they said. "I must have been," he said, "but it didn't seem like a dream." After breakfast, he went into Philadelphia. He spent the day high above the city in one of the new office buildings there. Late in the afternoon, he was waiting for an elevator to take him back down to the street. But when it arrived, it was very crowded. One of the passengers looked out and called to him. "There's room for one more," he said. It was the driver of the hearse. "No thanks," said Blackwell. "I'll get the next one." The doors closed and the elevator started down. There was shrieking and screaming, then the sound of a crash. The elevator had fallen to the bottom of the shaft, and everyone on board was killed. The end. I'm going to read one more. And it's called May I Carry Your Basket? Sam Lewis spent the evening playing chess at his friend's house. It was about midnight when they finished their game, and he started home. Outside it was icy cold and as quiet as the grave. As he came around a turn in the road, he was surprised to see a woman walking ahead of him. She was carrying a basket covered with a white cloth. When he caught up to her, he looked to see who it was. But she was so bundled up against the cold, it was hard to see her face. "Good evening," Sam said. "What brings you out so late?" But she didn't answer. Then he said, "May I carry your basket?" She handed it to him. From under the cloth, a small voice said, "That's very nice of you." And that was followed by wild laughter. Sam was so startled that he dropped the basket, and out rolled a woman's head. "It's her head," he cried, and he started to run, and the woman and her head began to chase him. Soon the head caught up to him. It bounded into the air and sunk its teeth into his left leg. Sam screamed with pain and ran faster. But the woman and her head stayed right behind. Soon the head leaped into the air again and bit into his other leg. And then they were gone. The end. It's just some silly little stories with a little tiny crackling candle. There we go. When you pull the wax away from it, give the wick a little room to work. It works better. It's actually very nice. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope that you enjoyed it. And I will see you again really soon.